Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, evening, wherever it is that you are. So we will be getting started in just a few minutes. But as usual, if you've been to a collab event before, you probably know a little bit about how we run all of our events. So please do drop an introduction or like a wave in this chat. We also have a LinkedIn thread where if you say hello, that's just going to be the easiest place to really connect with the others who are on this call after this call is over. So today we obviously have Kevin with us. We're gonna, again, start in just a few minutes, but super excited to be chatting about sort of his journey into product, how Coursera sort of feels, and what that process was also going from someone who does have a non-traditional, non-technical background and making it as a senior PM in the industry. So again, as a reminder, please drop your introduction or just at least a wave in this Zoom call. Use the link that Mitch on our team has shared to sort of connect with others who are here. And again, what we usually like to do with our events is keep them very casual and make it feel sort of like a conversation. We pull from audience Q&As all the time. We have a variety of questions that we've already curated and pulled from what folks have shared when they signed up for the event. But if you do have events or if you do have questions from what Kevin is saying as we go along, I'll be keeping an eye out on the chat. So just toss them in and we'll make sure to get them answered. And also something a little bit differently this time that we used to do before, but we're bringing it back. We are actually going to be hosting like a networking component of today's session. So Kevin is going to be sticking around. I'll be here. Mitch, Beth from the team will be here as well. And so depending on who's left here, we can split up into smaller breakout rooms where everyone will be able to get a chance to connect with the others who've been here. And then you'll also get a chance to connect with Kevin as well. So that being said, let us actually get started. I'm going to stop my screen sharing now. And again, today I'm super excited to be chatting with Kevin. Kevin is someone who was, we previously connected when he was a mentor for our bootcamp program. So it's just exciting to be able to like reconnect again and also talk a little bit more specifically about your journey into product, your journey going from a non-traditional background, and how even just in the journey of being in product, how you're thinking about leveling up and career growth from here. So I'm going to turn it over to you now. I'd love to hear a little bit just background about you. Go as deep as you want, share whatever it is that you want, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, sure. It's funny. This is bringing back memories because I was a mentor for Collab, had a great experience, like made some lifelong friends that I worked with too. Like worked with someone named Pragya who I talked to regularly, was in my cohort, and just incredible experience overall. But anyways, I'm Kevin Behan. Nice to meet all of you. I'm a cat enthusiast. I'm a hip hop head, and I've been a product manager for 8 or 9 years now, almost explicitly in ed tech. Had a background in education as well. I know, Helen, you wanted me to share a little bit about my background and how I got into it, so I'm happy to jump in there if that makes sense. Yeah, I was really drawn to psychology, going into undergrad, and I think I've always wanted to be in a role where I'm like understanding people and supporting them in some way. That was just core to who I am. And I just wanted to find tools to be able to explore that more deeply. And psychology just felt like the right thing. I don't think I knew at the time that that's what I was searching for, but like I was just an empathic person and I carried people's feelings and I wanted tools to be able to manage or understand that or go deeper into that. In psychology, I feel like, and maybe some of you here are psychology grads, but it gives you like the critical thinking pieces of empathy where you can understand people's motivations and behaviors and personality types and why they are the way they are and what they want and so on and so forth. And I think that was just fascinating for me. I also come from a family of educators, like K through 12 teachers, professors, administrators, you name it. So I think I just wanted to apply that to teaching. Like I figured I'd just be a teacher or a principal or an administrator. I don't know. Um, and I think the most eye-opening moment for me is when those things kind of collided. And I had this educational psych professor, and I ended up going into working at a preschool and being a preschool TA. And I applied like what I learned in educational psychology to the classroom. And like I set up this concrete manipulative with this number line where I had a little bunny, and I tried to use that to teach them about moving back and forward across the number line. And I saw like the impact it had on learning. And I think that was just like, oh, it's over. Like I was obsessed with that feeling of taking something, applying it directly, and seeing how it impacts someone. And I don't know. I think at that point I was like, I don't know what I go into, but I like that feeling. I'm not sure if I want to be a researcher, but I like the idea of knowing a lot about a domain, taking it, applying it, and then feeling the impact. And so I think, I don't know, I feel like that's defined kind of who I am as a product manager, where I have to feel the impact because I'm empathetic and it motivates me. And I want to be in a domain that I care about truly. So I feel passionate about it. And education just happened to be that domain and kind of shepherded me into product management too.
Gotcha. No, that's amazing to hear, and thank you for sharing. In this case, though, coming from a family of educators, what was sort of your first exposure with tech? And before you even know about product management, how did
Mm.
you know about product management?
My family is not techie at all. Um, so I definitely didn't hear about it from them. I think at some point, just in college, I was really fascinated with computer science. I took some classes. I thought I might want to pivot into computer science or double major or do something, but I think I discovered that it was just a little too theoretical for me, and I needed something more human or directly applicable to people. But it gave me an interesting tool, kind of planted a seed. And I was actually tutoring a lot of kids right out of college in math. I was very much like I'm a numbers person. They just kind of make sense to me. But I ended up tutoring this guy's son who was like 8 or 9 years old, who is like a kid genius who was learning calculus. So I was teaching him calculus, and then he was like, "Hey, math is a lot like coding. Why don't you teach at my company that I run? Why don't you teach kids to code, or why don't you try it?" And I was like, "Oh, all right, I sure, I'll give it a shot." So I learned a lot about coding that way and teaching kids, which I already loved and enjoyed. I think that was my first deep exposure to it. It was already like an interest of mine, but the transition from math, I was a math tutor for a while, to like coding, computer science was a nice like little pivot for me. And getting that opportunity from someone who'd already seen me teach kids and then just wanted me to learn something new, I think that was pretty cool. I got to get pretty deep into coding and transitioned into a software developer role after, actually shortly after that too.
Got it. So you do know how to code then?
I learned, yeah, like
Mm.
I certainly I taught kids to code in like very basic terms, so I picked some
Mhm.
things up there, but then they gave me an opportunity. It was at a startup and they needed software positions. They were raising funding, and I was one of our like more strong instructors, and he thought, "Okay, you taught my kid. I trust you in that way. You're doing
Mhm.
it as an instructor. We have software development roles. Why don't you give it a shot?" And so I did that for like a year.
Mhm.
Kind of discovered it's not my thing in terms of like having that much focused work in a kind of more isolated way, like doesn't activate the like interconnected piece of me or the empathy piece of me that's really important. But I picked up a lot of problem solving skills, which is super interesting and cool.
Awesome. And I just see a bunch of people sharing their backgrounds in the chat as well. Again, I have some questions. I want to hear a little bit more from Kevin on your background and just your experience transitioning from role to role. But for folks that have questions, please feel free to toss them in the chat whenever, because I'll always be taking a look and I'll just be pulling as we go along. So if you have a question you want answered, please do toss them in there. So I feel like that's an awesome story to hear as well, Kevin, because it sort of speaks to the power of relationship building as well in terms of getting some of these opportunities to switch roles almost in workplaces where that wasn't the role that you joined in as. And so you then started doing software engineering there. And then how did you then go from that into product?
Yeah. Uh, right before I get into that, someone asked about the latest Schoolboy Q album in the chat, and I just wanted to say, Blue Lips, incredible, fire, loved it. But anyways, sorry about that. Just had to say.
No, no,
Uh,
no. Those are the key insights that folks are here to gather. Don't worry.
yeah,
Never
he was awesome.
apologize.
He's back. Yeah, I think I think in a startup, there's a bunch of people who have to flex out of their roles. You may be a software developer, but there's like 15 people in the organization, and something needs to get done on like someone needs to write copy for the landing page, and the CEO doesn't have time to do it, and someone needs to raise their hand and do it. And so I think being successful in a startup is about being resourceful and like being willing to raise your hand and flex out of your role, even if it's uncomfortable and you stumble and you fail, like someone needs to do the work. And so I think I just kind of became, I don't want to say like the right-hand man for the CEO, but if there was ever something like he needed support writing something, I was a writing tutor in college. So I'd be like, oh, I'll help you write this email that's being drafted and sent to the investors, started picking things up, learned a little bit about like how we're communicating to investors. Like, but he saw that I could kind of flex into things. And when the opportunity arose where there was a need for like a true product manager, he was kind of serving as the product manager. He was interviewing people, but because I had done well in my own role and I knew so much about education, I think that was key is like I was obsessed with education and the domain itself. So I may not have known a lot about product management, but like I knew a lot about educational philosophies and frameworks and why, I don't know, why learning styles is a mythology and it's harmful to teaching. And like that was just something I was obsessed with. So I think that was the foundation that he saw as like, okay, if this person needed to solve education oriented problems, I think I trust that he can do that job well. Because he saw I had like a well-rounded understanding of instruction, how to train instructors, whatever was needed in terms of like from like an education capacity. And so I kind of fumbled through some of the product management stuff where I like didn't fully understand trade-offs and prioritizations and road mapping. But like if we needed to build a higher quality curriculum or instruction, like I knew what to do. But I think what was cool about not necessarily having the product management background, maybe cool isn't the right word to use there. What was interesting about that is I feel like it forced me to be really curious. Like I didn't fully know what I was doing. And so I wanted to ask a lot of questions. I wanted to seek guidance from people. And I wanted to try things and learn as fast as I possibly could. And I feel like I fell into a good product management mentality of like failing often and fast and getting feedback and being curious and seeking input from a lot of people. But I did that. I think that's naturally a part of who I am. But I also did that because I didn't really know what I was doing. But that's ever since become like a part of my process anyway.
No, that's awesome. And for the folks that you were reaching out to get support or help from, or just what resources did you use in those early days of
Oh man.
being in product, but not knowing what being in product meant?
My education psych professor, I got him shares in our company and got him to be an advisor and got him to advise on how we were setting up, how we did a lot of different things, how we were thinking optimizing attendance in our after school program. Like he had consulted on a lot of stuff, but he was also just a great mind for educational research. He was like, to this day, he was been super core to me. Like Richard Meyer, love that guy, super inspiring, has done great research, but he was extremely important. But I feel like I just sought input from everyone at the organization in general, like from the software developers, because I had been a software developer, from our designers, our graphic designers, our instructors who worked at the after school program. Like I was almost a bit of a people pleaser almost in the beginning because I just wanted to make everyone happy. And then later on, I learned in my career that like that's impossible in product management. But at the time, I just didn't fully know what I was doing. So I was just like kind of blissfully ignorant in terms of just taking input from literally anyone. It didn't matter who it was. Because I thought that they could have, if I just compiled all of the ideas, that I could rely on my problem solving to figure out like what the best one might be given I knew about the domain. I don't know if that totally makes sense, but that's kind of what was key for me.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? That's what beginner mindset means, and being able to, recognize that we don't have all the answers, that and relying on connections that you have previously as well, such as like your professor. In terms of then, so going from this first product role into your second product role, now at a different company, can you share a little bit about how that experience was, just like in landing it, in prepping for the interview, and how you thought about bringing your previous experience?
Yeah. Yeah, that was really interesting. I mean, I worked at another ed tech company after that, at a company called Go Guardian, K through 12 ed tech. And my boss, the CEO, wasn't like he didn't have a strong awareness of product management either. And he expected me just to kind of figure it out, apply things. So I didn't have like all of the formal language for explaining stuff that they expect you to have in an interview. And so I don't know, sometimes I felt kind of nervous explaining because they'd ask me like, what is your, I don't know, rolling Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 roadmap? And I was like, I don't even know if we were using queues at all at the startup I was working for. Is that a question, or I don't know, I'm just kidding. But I the language was overwhelming for me because I didn't have the formal training. And I think I just may have gotten lucky because I interviewed with a bunch of people who were very passionate about education. By the way, I got rejected, but the chief product officer, the head of product, was like, this person is extremely passionate about education and is a good problem solver, and he's just going to figure it out. And they were like, what if we brought you back as a contractor and you tried it out for 3 months or whatever, and we saw how that went? And it went well from there. But I think having that lack of like formalized language that people could hang on to, I think bothered people. They felt like they might not be able to trust me to do the job well. But this one person had a lot of faith in me, and like we went deep into different situations and scenarios, and he was like very visionary in nature. And that so much about education and learning and all of that, that like that's something I feel very comfortable talking about in any capacity. So I think that's just always what I relied on, is like fall in love with the domain. The other stuff will come into play, like, but if you're very passionate about it, you know how it works, you'll figure the other stuff out, and you need to, and you have things like collab to help you with that. And people will expect you to know that to some degree. But if you want to like actually succeed in the role, you have to be in love with the domain. At least I think so. Or other people can. I just don't feel like it's as enjoyable. And for me, I have to kind of enjoy the work that I'm doing. I have to wake up to it and believe in it. Otherwise, it's just, I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be a terrible product manager.
And speaking a little bit more about just like your experience as a PM, there's a question right now. As a PM, it sounds like a lot of the job is talking to people and asking questions and finding things out. How do
Yeah.
you do that with SMEs that are super busy without actually taking up too much time? I sometimes feel like I'm annoying people when I have too many questions.
That's that's tough because I think what you can, I don't want to say there's some negative outcomes. You just have to be careful because the other approach is, which can sometimes happen, is like you feel like you're taking up too much of someone's time, and then you don't gain a deep enough understanding, and then you start blindly trusting people where you're like, and then you can be influenced by the strongest opinion because you'll be like, oh, the tech lead said we need to prioritize the tech debt. I don't fully understand what it means, but I'm going to trust them. And it's like, maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't, maybe you should push back. But like to be able to push back, you need the foundational understanding. You don't have to be an engineer yourself or an expert, but you have to know enough that you can confidently push back, because otherwise you can be influenced or manipulated. That's a strong word, but like it can happen. People can be persuasive, and you want to be objective, or as objective as you possibly can be. So I think what I try to do is like show the team that I'm in the trenches with them. So like, oh man, I remember one of our tech leads had proposed doing this complete like front end rewrite where we were going from JavaScript to TypeScript. And that meant pausing development for like 3 to 4 months, not shipping any features to users or prioritizing their requests or needs. And I was just like, we can't do this. And the person actually like yelled at me in front of my boss because I was like, is there a way we can do it in a smaller way? And they're like, you don't understand how this works. And we had a side conversation. She was crying and it was very intense. But I think after that, I actually decided to write my own application in JavaScript, refactor it into TypeScript, and like went and talked to the team. And I was like, I want you to see that I'm in this with you, like 100%. Like I want to learn and empathize with you. I'm not going to be an expert, but I also want to be curious myself as like a student, because I think as a product manager, sometimes you're just giving direction. And so I think you got to ask as many questions as you can to show them that like you're in it with them. You know, you're not above them or below them. You're just right there with them. And I think as long as you show them that you're committed to it and like you're doing stuff with the information and you're using it to prioritize or things and you make it clear, you follow up with them, eventually they understand. Like they'll start to feel like maybe a sense of authority there too, or partnership. But if you just ask questions, you don't follow up or show them that you're doing anything with the information, then it can feel hollow and then yeah, it can be tough.
I totally agree with that. And I also like what Elizabeth wrote in the chat as well. Just being able to take what other folks have said, doing more research yourself and making them feel like there's been an outcome or some impact with all of the time that they've spent with you, right? Like showing that curiosity on your own, doing competitive analysis so that you can bring new insights to them. I think there's a lot of ways um, to really just learn a lot with other people, but not, trespassing too much on their time. So that makes a lot of sense. There was a question on the Luma that I really liked, and it was around coffee chats. And so the question was actually around, hey, if someone reaches out to you for a coffee chat, what questions would you want to answer on that coffee chat? And what questions won't you want to answer?
Someone reaches out to me for a coffee chat.
Mhm.
Okay, help me understand something. Are like at the company, they're just reaching out to me, or is it just a friendly request and they just want to have coffee with me and they want to talk about anything?
I think let's say the context is they're reaching out to you on LinkedIn and they're like, I love your
Oh,
background. I saw your profile, your details. I'd love to grab coffee. Well, I think that's something that everyone here is trying to do as well with maybe
yeah.
not just you, but maybe probably you, but others. So how do you think in your mind, like what's a proposal that you would like be able to easily accept, and what kind of conversation would you want to have with someone?
I'm probably very, I don't know if unique is the right word for this, but I'm very deliberate in this, and that like if I reach out to somebody, I make an effort to like understand something about them and show them that it's intentional and like have a personalized message. I'm very much an individualizer, but like that's key to me too. Like I want to see that there's something specific about me that makes sense for us to connect around, like, so if something feels very generic or canned, or like you just copy and pasted a message to me, then I feel like someone else is going to make the effort to show me that they actually care about me or want to connect to me as a person. And I'm like, then I'll always give my time. Um, and I think then like my main question is I just want to be useful. Like that's all I care about. Or if I can be supportive to you in some way, that's great. If I can help you or refer you, connect you with people, I'm happy to do it. But I mean, I just want like that's it. I just want to be useful. So whatever it is that you're trying to learn, like PM fundamentals or thoughts on how to position your resume or whatever the case may be, I'm open to sharing feedback as long as I can be useful. But if there's things that where I can't be useful or someone else might be more useful or have better perspective, then I'm probably going to pass you on to somebody else. But as long as you show me that there's a genuine interest in who I am as a person, then I'm happy to work through whatever.
Perfect. And so in terms of your current role, how like was interviewing for senior roles any different than non-senior roles? What were some of the things that you felt like they were looking for?
Yeah.
And how are you managing your career from here?
Mm. Every company has its own interview culture. So that will influence the way that the interview takes place too, in addition to being interviewed for a more senior role. Like some companies will not slot you for a particular role, but based on how you perform against a rubric will then determine like if you're senior or not, or whatever the case may be, and they're open to you falling into any potential position. Whereas others are explicitly interviewing you for one role. Um, I think, and this is how I've done interviews too, and I've seen other people do interviews like this as well. In like a more junior product management role or entry level product management role, the focus is more on execution. Like, can you carry out a well-defined project and can you execute it well? And can whoever needs to hand this off to you feel comfortable like that you're going to get it done and you can work with whoever you need to work with, engineers, design, etc., to get it across the finish line? Are you going to need to do some compelling vision and strategy work? Maybe not. They may ask you about that. They may be curious, but like it's not going to be weighted towards that. In a senior role, they may ask you an open-ended question like, "Hey, I give you $1 million to invest in an ed tech product. Talk me through how from day 0 to 1 year, how you build an MVP, find product market fit, then reinvest to get to profitability," or something crazy. Like, so they want you to see that the whole end-to-end experience. I think something I've seen too from talking to a lot of like more entry-level product managers is sometimes they'll spend a little too much time on thinking through the problem and how they would perform the research and prioritize something when like there's a burning question in the back of the person's head. Maybe it's the investor or CEO or whoever it is. It's like, how do I get my money back? And like, that's something that I used to neglect earlier on, or maybe that's something people explicitly pay attention to. You can lean one way or the other where you're focused more on the users or the business side of things. But I think they expect you to have a comprehensive vision for like how you're doing the product strategy, the vision work, how the roadmap rolls up and reflects that strategy, so on and so forth, as opposed to just you can write a PRD, you can have really good requirements, you can diagnose the problem, you can do user research, and you can carry out a project to completion.
No, 100%. I think one of the, yeah, for junior roles, I mean, unless you're at a super small startup and there's no one doing the strategy alongside you, it's probably unlikely that you're going to be tasked with doing large scale strategy. But that obviously needs to build on top of your execution skills, right? So how well can you speak to users? How well can you synthesize feedback? How well is your written communication? What does influencing without authority in your mind look like, right? How well do you work with engineers? How well do you work with user research, marketing, design, etc.? All of those things are attributes that are super key from an execution perspective. But it's really cool to hear like the variety of questions that you might get from like a senior level. I would also add too that I think that's a really key point. It's important right now when markets are slightly, worse, and companies are very, very focused on how they can either increase revenue or cut costs, right? So being able to go that extra mile in tying back not just your feature in terms of usage or retention or churn or satisfaction, but hey, what's the profit and loss on something like this, right? Thinking about it as a business in itself and the revenue that you're generating, I think that does push, if you're in a current role, that pushes you slightly, above. And it could be something unique that helps you stand out too when you're trying to break in even.
Oh yeah, like, and there's a lot of talks around reducing the scope of your product offering or divestment or getting rid of features and products entirely, like as a form of cost savings. And I think in this market, that's becoming very important. And like, that's not something, if somebody tells you to pitch a product for you to respond, like, actually, we should divest the product, that's like a pretty strong position to take. But I think that's something more people want to hear, or that you're open to an idea like that, because it shows them that you're very like business minded.
Yeah, and it's unique enough and it really helps you stand out, I feel like, if one gives an answer like that. Um, there was another question just in the chat here. Being a psych student myself, it's easy to get lost in steps and goals to achieve getting into product management. From that, did you feel the same way at one point? If so, how did you go about it and what would you suggest other people who are in the same boat?
Get lost in the steps, achieve getting into product management. Do you feel the same way? Like, I want to make sure I understand this as clearly as I can. Like, is the idea that you can kind of get,
And I'll ask Amna to actually unmute if they want to add a little bit more context to that. And if they don't, then I'll add a little bit more context based on some of the other questions that I've seen. I'm not sure if you wanted to unmute or just toss some more details. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, hi, sorry. So in terms of my question, I meant that like in terms of getting into product management, I find that because of the many resources and options that are available online already, I think it can get easy to get lost in what to start with, and that's what I'm personally going through. So I just wanted to ask if this is something that you've also experienced, and I was just wondering how you went about that.
Oh yeah, okay. Thank you for clarifying too. I understand what you're talking about. I think what's key is like start. This feels so simple and like hackneyed, but like start applying some framework or concept in your real life immediately. Like I think I was reading some product management book. I forgot which one it was. I was reading a couple when I was first getting into it, and I was trying to like learn the frameworks and the language for things. And what I ended up doing is I was like, I had a game night with my friends, and I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do some user research using what I learned in this book on game night, and I'm just going to focus on improving game night the next like couple of months, and that was it. And I'm not going to take in any more new information until I feel like I accomplished or like mastered whatever it is I found in the book that I was reading at the time. I forgot what book it was exactly. It was a pretty good book. If I recall it, I'll make sure to share it at some point. But like that was my focus. And I put these surveys together and I was interviewing my friends and we were talking about like who do people care about bringing food, or like is at what point are we staying too late? And I used like a satisfaction scale for my questions and synthesized my research. And I hadn't done that before. And it was just fascinating for me to understand all these things about my friends that we literally didn't think twice about this. We were just like, hey, let's meet up on a Friday and have a game night. But I don't know, that I think that's the key grounding mechanism for me is I need to see that I'm making progress. And when I feel like dizzy or ungrounded or untethered, I know that it's because I'm like what I call for myself philosophizing, where I'm like thinking about my grand scheme for how I'm going to accomplish something as opposed to being grounded and doing the actual work. There's a balance to be had there. But I know when I'm in that feeling, even in just my own life, I call that philosophizing. I'm like, Kevin, we have accomplished nothing. We have just thought about it a long time. But it's really hard. And I find myself doing that a lot, just very introspective person. I don't know if you're like that too, but it's tough. It's tough to find the balance because there's a time for that as well, where you need to reassess and be like, am I still learning? Is this still useful? Have I mastered this? Am I getting anything out of this? But once you've set on the course, you have to focus and just do the thing, you know?
Yeah, there's only so much that we can spend too on just constantly pulling in new information. At some point, if we have to act in an agile way, bringing in agile product development, it does need us to take action to apply the learnings, to learn, to fail, and to sort of redo it again based on what happens. But I also would just add that, hey, any small step is better than no step. And so if you're in that process of like making incremental steps right now, definitely keep it up. And you might not see the payoff just yet, but over time, your energy, like who you meet, the little things that you pick up, they really do compound. And so just to switch it a little bit into like the careers oriented stuff. Nowadays, I mean, you're in a senior role now. You probably have some insight as to how the industry is, how like maybe you've done some interviews at Coursera as well. What advice do you have for folks that are pivoting from these non-standard backgrounds? And just to seed some ideas, like, do you have any thoughts on like APM programs? Should folks just be applying to product roles specifically? Or what about getting into their dream job first and then eventually pivoting? Do you have any like thoughts or insights about those things?
Mm. What I've seen when the market ends up in a place where it's constrained, and there's like less money or resources available to companies, is there's like two different general, this is oversimplifying it, but just for the point, I'll do that for now. There's like two different approaches. They either focus on hiring more senior people or like just senior people and fewer of them. And they expand their scope and sense of responsibilities and whatever else. And they're like, just figure it out. And then there's other companies that will start hiring more junior people to bring in people at like a lower salary because they have less money available. So like just from a cost perspective, like APM positions will start popping up. So it really depends on the company culture, how they're thinking about their resources and what's available for the product department in general. But like, so I think you'll see some of those positions disappear from some companies if they decide to take the first path that I was talking about, where they just want senior type people. And that's it. But yeah, I mean, and is there any specific, are you saying, is there any specific guidance for people who want to get into an APM role, maybe starting there, or are you saying?
Well, I think there were just some questions in the chat about whether, like, if should folks be spending time if you don't have any PM experience, what should you do? Should you spend your time looking for APM roles? Should you spend your time, maybe at your current company trying to pivot and get a little bit of a product experience so that you can switch
Yeah.
companies? Yeah, what would you do if you just don't have that experience, other than collab, of course?
Yeah, I don't know if this is an obvious option, but something that we do at Coursera is there's like a PM rotation program that you can volunteer for, where if you're in a different function, but you want PM experience, you want to be able to put it on your resume, you get to partner with a mentor for a quarter and like do a project with a product manager, which I did with somebody like a couple quarters ago in Q4. But then that gives you like the exposure, it's experience you can put on your resume potentially, and it indicates to the company that you're potentially interested in a pivot. And I know some companies will consider internal candidates first before they open their pool to other people. So if a company offers that, that's an obvious opportunity. I definitely feel like having really good experience in either design, engineering, or something business focused, like business analyst, something to that effect, and like really crystallizing your skill set there and showing that you have an edge in one of those different buckets can be compelling, as long as you show or demonstrate that you have the other like interpersonal skills as well. Like, let's say if you're an engineer and you're used to kind of working more in an isolated environment, but like showing that there's transition or like transferable skills. Because if you're an engineer now and you're transitioning into product management, you will be probably good at working with cross-functionally with engineers and potentially at problem solving and other things that are core to the product management function. So I've seen some companies count certain experiences as like, oh, this checks the box. You've been an engineer for this many years. You're probably sufficient at problem solving. We trust that. You've been a designer for a certain number of years. Maybe we trust that you're good at doing user research or something like they'll just count some of those skills as being transferable depending on the role. I think it's really important to like position yourself that way in your resume, especially, and even then it could still be tough. But I've definitely seen people get opportunities and even get like senior product management roles after having been like, just a customer success manager or something, because they know they've demonstrated very clearly that they can have an impact on the business by prioritizing the right opportunities. Sometimes I think it just comes down to framing in the resume where people will give you a chance. And then I also think something I said before is like knowing the domain in and out will just make you invaluable, because like, hey, you don't have the product management experience, but you know a hell of a lot about education. So you're going to be useful in some capacity no matter what. So I think maybe narrowing your focus to a certain set of domains where you can become a domain expert, and you may not necessarily have the product management experience, but you have some transferable skills from a different domain. Like you can kind of piece it together that way, I think.
No, totally. And I would say that for anyone who is, trying to transition right now, like just leverage all of the networks and circles that you're in, right? If you already have domain knowledge in one aspect, think about all of the folks that you know within that space, even if you're not a PM right now, right? If you're in customer success in a B2B company, or if you're in CPG, right? What kind of consumer packaged goods and what kind of industry does that get you slightly closer to so that you could have that edge? And I think to what Kevin says, right? Like it really, the background, I think for a lot of us feel like it's sort of a detractor, but there's a lot of value that you can also bring into the space, right? Hey, if you're in customer success, you know exactly how to speak to customers, you know exactly what it is that they want and how to sort of like open doors for them. right? Hey, Kevin was previously in psychology, but he also has such a huge passion for education. Doesn't matter that he doesn't know it's called a spec, right? It just matters that he knows sort of like the overall vision and how things could run or could go. So I think that's super awesome. So in this case, I mean, I do want us to get a chance to sort of like network with one another and like get an opportunity to chat with one another. And Kevin will also be here and I'll still be here. So I think what it is that I'd love to do now is just ask you, Kevin, if there's anything else that you'd like to share with this group, any parting words before we get to the small group breakout session part.
I wanted to add one last thing to that too. Like, I think it's important to look at certain companies and their founders or executive team or whoever. Some of them may come from a non-traditional background, and like they may be more willing or have created a culture that's open to that type of thing. Like I know education companies that were started by teachers and they value people that have teaching experience. So if you're coming into a product management role, having been a teacher, like they may be more open to you. But I think taking a look at the story or the background of certain founders or executives might give you, it might be a tell that like, oh, they may be more interested in or open to someone of my type of background. And sorry, in terms of final words, I mean, I I just feel for everyone that's trying to transition right now in this market. Like I know it's difficult, and if this is something you're passionate about and feel like you can excel in, and you just need a shot, and right now it feels like there's fewer shots to be had, that has to be really difficult. So I just feel for everybody, and I don't know how you can find like the persistence or the grit necessary to keep going so you can get a shot, but I hope that you find it however that looks like for you guys.
Thanks, Kevin. And yeah, I think for everyone here that is undergoing or in that process right now, sometimes it it no matter one, it's a marathon. Career switching is a marathon. Career switching in general is hard. It's even harder now. And I also just want to appreciate everyone for showing up and listening to this as well, because it's so hard to show up when you're not feeling great, right? But we've all been through very difficult things before in the past, and truthfully, you never know how one door can open another one. And that's why, like, I'm really excited to be able to have this conversation with you as well. If this leads to anything for anyone in terms of anyone connecting with someone whose sectors actually just match up or someone else has an opportunity, now really is the time to like get to know one another and help each other. And also remember that you're not alone in this struggle. Because it's definitely hard and there's not like sometimes it's not you. Most of the time it's probably not you if you're at this event and participating and asking these right questions, because we're all asking some of these questions as well. So at this point, I did want to set up the breakout rooms. For anyone that doesn't want to participate, maybe just take the next 30 seconds to drop off the call. But for those that are staying, I definitely want to give everyone the opportunity to at least meet a few other people, to talk a little bit, just introduce yourself, get to know one another. Maybe it's something that'll lead somewhere. And if not, at least you will have made a friend or be able to commiserate about, how PM is in your current role or stuff like that.